Podcasts are books on steroids. They are the modern solution to the ancient problem of having too little time for so much knowledge. If you ever felt like you wanted to learn about a particular topic, but you didn't have the time to pick up a book, sit down, and study for 2 hours, then listening to a 30-minute podcast while commuting to work might be a great option, right? There are four podcasts which I guarantee you will love. If you are ambitious and a high achiever, listen to Founders Podcast by David Senra. Life happens in cycles. Chances are that if you want to do something, it's already been done. You might want to start a company. You might want to be a great podcaster. You might want to be a great author. You might want to be the world's best athlete. You might want to explore space. But all these things have been done before. And do you know something? The top 1% of the people in any given industry reach that top based on a certain specific skill set and character traits plus beliefs. Now, in his podcast, David Senra essentially condenses a 1,000 pages book of a person's life summary in just 1 hour. Just think about it, 1,000 pages versus 1 hour. The return on investment the return on investment of your time is extraordinary. The few great episodes which I found, some of my favorite episodes from this podcast were How Elon Works, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Demis Hanabis, and Bruce Springsteen. Now, if you are a curious snowflake who wants to know everything about life, then listen to Lex Friedman podcast. Lex Friedman is an ex-MIT researcher turned podcaster. He is also a black belt in jiu-jitsu and can riz up your girl with his piano star guitar skills, meaning he is a polymathic entity. Since he is so curious, he also invites a horde of guests from different domains of life. For example, physics, maths, history, biologists, physicists, actors, politicians, founders, AI researchers, basically anything you can think of, musicians as well, game developers. So in his podcast, no matter what you are curious in, you can find at least 5 podcasts on that topic, 5 episodes on that particular topic, right? You think of it as listening to a convo rather than an interview. Since Lex is a curious person and likes to ask deep philosophical questions from the guest, he makes us also get immersed in the topic. Why? Because, first of all, he himself is very curious about the topic. Instead of just asking a question from the guest, getting the answer, and moving on, he actually wrestles with the guest to try and understand the guest's perspective. And this makes us naturally curious and get much more immersed in his podcast. Some of my favorite episodes from its podcast are Pavel Dirov, Mark Andreessen, Sarah Walker, Elon Musk, Arvind Srinivas, and much more. These are just some favorite of mine. Now, if you want to understand the present and predict the future, listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Why is that? First of all, we have all heard the quote that read history, learn from your ancestors' mistakes, and don't repeat them. But who has the time to pick up a 500-page boring history book and read? That's where Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast comes in. He has he covers a whole variety of topics like Alexander the Great biography, the Celtic Holocaust, Asia Pacific Wars in a narrative movie style format with sound effects and engaging narrative basically, while also retaining all of the details, the minute details. Why? Because he himself is a history nerd, and when you are nerdy about something, you like to get in the details and talk about it. And most of us will actually appreciate that. So that's that. One important note is that after essentially 30 hours of free content, the rest of his content, which is around 60 podcast episodes, is actually paid for $100 or something. It's a steal in my opinion, but you can listen to the free episodes, judge his work, and then buy accordingly if you want. Now, the last podcast which I will recommend is, if you love to read stories, if you love those story driven series, animes, books, movies, then this is a gem. This is a really freaking gem. It's Becoming the Main Character by James Allison. Recently, I have been dirtying my hands with a lot of classics: Homer, Kafka, Dostoevsky, and it's one of those trips when I was finding something to listen. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, that I found this podcast, Become the Main Character. It's essentially the host narrating the canon parts of the story while removing the fillers. And what makes this podcast really good is that after a few like in between story, the host also gives his own perspective on how the story is going. This makes this isolating activity as actually social one. Why? Because whenever listening to a story, we ourselves have some perspective on the story, some thought on it, right? And then the narrator also gives us his thought. Like, for example, there is a character, a man, and we think about him as a good character in the story, a character who is a kind person. But the host points out that he is actually not a good character. He is masking his evil intentions with his good actions. And thus, we are able to compare our perspective with other humans' perspective as we go through this activity of listening to a book, right? And it makes it genuinely enjoying because at every moment you are kind of anticipating that at this point the host will tell you his perspective, and then you will compare it. It makes it much more enjoyable, and that's it. Some of my favorite episodes from this podcast are Crime and Punishment, The Great Gatsby, and Pride and Prejudice. Basically, three out of the four episodes which I have heard. In the end, I will urge you to open up your calendar and schedule at least one of these episodes from any of the podcasts and listen to it in your free time. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and do let me know if I missed any gems.